All right, welcome to the Explainer. So today we're taking a bit of a detour. Instead of, our usual deep dives into data sets or historical timelines, we're going to explore a modern-day parable. It's this incredible story pulled right from our source material, authored by a guy named Jeff, and honestly, it plays out almost like a campfire story. It's all about a man, a woman, and a completely absurd, massive pile of cash just sitting on a kitchen table. It's got wild highs, tragic twists, and a pretty mind-blowing lesson about what actually holds value in our lives. So get comfortable and let's just get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to genuinely imagine this scenario for a second. Imagine you walk into your living space, you look over at your kitchen table, and right there in plain sight are just massive, untethered stacks of cash. $50 bills, piled up, just waiting to be spent. I mean, most of us would be immediately planning vacations, right? Or buying a new car, or at the very least, heavily upgrading our living room furniture. It sounds like the absolute ultimate dream. But for the guy in our story, this wasn't a dream at all. It was his bizarre, everyday reality, and the reason why is quite a roller coaster. So, to actually understand the cash on the table, we kind of have to rewind and look at his downfall. Years ago, this guy was living what society calls the good life. He was rich, comfortable, totally on top of the world. But then the bottom completely fell out. He lost his job, his wife left, and she took practically everything. He went through a really rough couple of years after that, coping in all the wrong ways, drinking, smoking, basically burning through a huge chunk of his remaining wealth. But miraculously, he actually came out the other side. Which brings us to the present day in Jeff's story. He's left with this surreal artifact of his past, these leftover stocks of cash, just sitting there on his kitchen table like a constant, quiet reminder of everything he used to be. And we're not talking about pocket change here. We are talking about literal piles of crisp $50 bills. Just sitting there. Every single day, he'd be sitting on his couch in the living room, which was right next to the kitchen, and out of his peripheral vision, out of the corner of his left eye, he could just see these 50s. A literal fortune just gathering dust. But here is the wild irony of his new life. On one hand, you have the cash, right? The ultimate symbol of material success. But what was he actually doing with his time? He wasn't out buying yachts or blowing those 50s. He was sitting on the couch, playing video games with his friends, getting ready for a board game night, making microwave popcorn. He was choosing these simple, basically free joys over the literal fortune sitting 10 feet away. And he was actually happy, maybe for the first time in a really long time. And a huge reason for that found new happiness was the person he was making that popcorn for. Enter his new girlfriend. She fundamentally changed the whole trajectory of his life. She was a diabetic, and instead of focusing all his energy on, making more money or dwelling on his past, his focus completely shifted to caring for her. He'd spend his days reminding her to keep an eye on her sugar levels, making sure she took her insulin on time. He was just deeply, deeply invested in her well-being because he loved her so much. It was this massive shift from a life built on material wealth to a life rich in care and actual human connection. In that care, it was entirely mutual. See, before her, our protagonist had never really been able to be truly open or vulnerable. He honestly didn't even know how to properly recognize his own feelings. But the source text describes her impact beautifully. It says she would hold his hand and just sit and talk with him and counsel him through the seasonal depression. She gave him this kind of emotional wealth and stability that he had lacked his entire life, even back when he had all the money in the world. She completely broke down his walls. But as you probably know, stories about true wealth are rarely without tragedy, and this is where things take a sharp, really devastating turn. They were both feeling great, so they decided, hey, let's take a weekend ski trip to a resort. He grabs $1,800 from the table and off they go. But on the second night, she became violently sick. It was just a complete halt to their lives. She was immediately hospitalized. Doctors ran all these tests, but everything kept coming back inconclusive. And, to make matters worse, she didn't have insurance coverage for these types of specialists, meaning the medical bills were just massive and immediate. And, tragically, she slipped into a coma, lying there for an entire month. Meanwhile, back at the kitchen table, the money basically became a physical barometer for the whole crisis. He started pulling from the stocks to pay these huge uncovered bills. Within just a month or two, the fortune on the table was slashed right down the middle, 50% of it just gone, entirely swallowed up by the hospital. But the crazy thing is, the stress he was feeling wasn't about the vanishing money, not even a little bit. He was stressed because the prognosis was terrible, and the person he loved more than anything in the world was slipping away. The source text hits us with this incredibly powerful realization. It says he would have spent every last dollar of his just to hear her voice again. Just think about that for a second. All that remaining wealth, the ultimate symbol of his former good life, it meant absolutely nothing. He would have gladly traded every single $50 bill on that table for just one more conversation. But unfortunately, all the money in the world couldn't buy a cure. A week later, she was gone, just like that. The light of his renewed life was suddenly extinguished. The aftermath of this was incredibly heavy. He was thrust into this stark, empty routine. He would just sit alone on that same couch most nights, totally lost in his own thoughts. The grief was so consuming that he'd frequently just forget to eat entirely. His days were basically reduced to emptying overflowing ashtrays and making cups of coffee in the kitchen, solely because it gave him a quiet moment to just sit and think of her. And this brilliantly illustrates the central theme of our explainer today. There was still a small fortune sitting right there on the kitchen table, but it was completely untouched. He'd walk right past it to make his coffee, and he wouldn't even notice it was there. It was completely useless to his healing. I mean, it couldn't comfort him, it couldn't bring her back, and it certainly couldn't numb the pain of losing the very person who taught him how to feel in the first place. But humans are incredibly resilient, right? And slowly, very, very slowly, he began to heal. And what's really fascinating is how he did it. He didn't go on some lavish spending spree to cheer himself up. He eventually just started gaming again. He made himself simple bowls of noodles. He binged his favorite Netflix shows, and he started exploring new music. Every single thing that brought a tiny spark of joy back into his world was essentially 100% free. He also discovered a new passion during this time. He found out he absolutely loved to journal. And the really beautiful part about that? This was a coping skill she had taught him. By writing down his thoughts, he was working through his feelings and honoring the emotional lessons she had left behind. She gave him the exact tools he needed to survive her absence, and honestly, it didn't cost a dime. As time went on, he finally felt ready to unpack her boxes. He went through the things she had held on to, the sentimental items that meant so much to her. And holding these objects, he was hit with this massive philosophical realization. As Jeff writes in the text, everything you own, you leave. Everything you collect stays put. You don't get to take anything with you. It's a pretty sobering truth. No matter how tightly we try to hold on to our possessions, in the end, they are really just things that get left behind in cardboard boxes. Watching her slip away a little bit more each day, and then sifting through the physical remnants of her life, it fundamentally rewired his brain. It forced him to ask himself the ultimate question, and actually, it's one I want to pose to you watching right now. Am I even doing anything that matters? If all our stuff just stays behind, what is actually left of us? Well, the answer he arrived at is what we call the true legacy. He realized that if the only things left of you are memories, you better make sure you're making good ones. He wanted to know he made a difference. He realized that true wealth is found in the lives you help touch. It's in building deep, vulnerable relationships with other people. It's about making positive memories that outlive you. It's about sharing your talents, teaching, learning, and genuinely being of service to people who need it. That is literally the only real footprint we leave on this earth. So after this incredible journey of extreme wealth, utter loss, deep love, and profound grief, where does money actually fit in? Well, he actually made a top 50 list of things I like to have. He totally acknowledged that yes, money is nice, it provides comfort and security, absolutely. But on his list of 50 things, money only ranked at number 19. Almost everything above it were things you couldn't actually put a price tag on. Because when he looked back over his life, when he was really happy or sad or angry or lonely, he realized the absolute truth about that kitchen table. Those $50 bills that he knew were always sitting right there, they were in reality nothing but some stacks of paper. And as he learned the incredibly hard way, paper doesn't create internal happiness, and it certainly can't save the people you love. It's a really powerful parable, isn't it? It just strips away all the noise of our daily grind and leaves us with this crystal clear perspective on value. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on today. What stacks of paper, whether that's literal money or status or material possessions, are you prioritizing right now over the people, the relationships, and the memories in your own life? Take a moment to really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and I'll catch you in the next one.